So, recently, I've been on a bit of a visual novel kick, buying one or two, playing some fan-made ones like Pokemon Academy Life, and I've been having a pretty good time. Romance routes are usually fun and fulfilling, and stories tend to be well composed. Hell, some of my favourite shows stem from visual novels, like Steins Gate, which has gotten massive critical acclaim for both its mechanics and its storytelling. On top of this, I'm already a pretty big fan of the Yuri subgenre, which should be pretty apparent given some of my favorite shows, manga, and yes, even visual novels. In fact, my favorite visual novel so far has been Kindred Spirits on the Roof, which is all about Yuri romances. So when I saw a Yuri visual novel was making its US debut on Steam, I decided to keep my eye on it. Titled Nurse Love Addiction, it finally released on July 8th of 2016, and after reading some rather positive and humorous reviews, I decided to pick it up while it was on sale.
So I've decided I'll be cataloging my journey throughout the game so that we can all experience it together. Let's dive right in!
The story opens with our protagonist, Asuka Osachi, reflecting on her life decisions as she enrolls in nursing school. Apparently she's a pretty major slacker and hadn't really made up her mind about what to do after graduating high school. Unable to come up with a decision, she eventually stumbles upon an old picture book from when she was a child, in the back of which she wrote down a promise that she made to herself to become a nurse. Finding no other impetus in her life, she decides to commit to her childhood goal and enrolls in Taito Nursing Academy, with her younger sister now following right behind. Even though she's the younger sister, Nao is actually the far more responsible one, and takes the role as Asuka's main caretaker after they move into the dorms together, even though Asuka made a promise to gradually become more self-reliant. And before you ask, Nao and Asuka are less than a year apart, so that's why they both fall within the same school year. After some shenanigans waking Asuka up, the two depart their dorm to attend their first day of classes. There we meet their teacher, Kaed Ohara, who Asuka immediately, and I mean in like 0 time flat, becomes smitten with, given how pretty the woman supposedly is. This is actually where one of my gripes with both visual novels and with a lot of anime generally crops up. There's a trend where characters are described as being unnaturally pretty or beautiful in some way, when really nothing about their character design sticks out from the rest of the cast. I mean, sure, Miss Ohara looks really damn cute, what with her well-managed hair and big doughy eyes, but so does everyone else with their well-managed hair and big doughy eyes. What about her makes her prettier than the others? Shows like Madoka Magica, or hell, even Mirai Nikki use this trope as a bullet point about the characters, and even then, it just makes them more distinguishable to the viewer. Homura is noted to have pretty nice hair, and we see that pretty prominently when she's next to anyone who isn't a main character. Similarly, Yuno has a very distinct look compared to, well, just about everyone, and while she's noted to be very attractive, she's not considered beautiful enough to outshine other characters in the cast. This is even lampooned in some shows like Sakura Trick, where the character everyone touts as the most pretty is really only kind of average looking. The show knows this with the way they present her, but all the characters act as if she's a true Elysian beauty. On point, Miss Ohara doesn't have anyone to counterbalance against except for the main cast, who are all attractive young women.
I'll actually be touching upon this point again a little bit later, so keep it in the back of your mind.
After going to the bathroom, Asuka runs into the remaining two romantic candidates of the story, Itsuki and Sakuya, the latter of which is described in the same "she's so pretty" awe as Miss Ohara earlier. It actually makes me kind of feel bad for Nao, as she's the only character never described in those terms.
And before you ask, yes, your little sister is in fact a romantic candidate. Which, when you think about it, are you really all that surprised? I mean, anime in general has this whole incest thing going on from time to time, and while usually it's a cousin, the whole siblings being romantic candidates for each other has been cropping up more and more recently. Japan, is there maybe something you want to talk about? I mean, we'll listen. We might not understand, but we'll listen.
Anyway, each character's traits are pretty quickly established. As I said earlier, Nao is the doting, responsible sister who seems to be attached to Asuka's hip. Miss Ohara is the calm, collected voice of reason who tends to hide her shyer, more insecure side to herself. Sakuya comes right out of the gate as an archetypal tsundere with the way she shies and disciplines Asuka, and Itsuki is definitely the well-meaning, mischievous troublemaker. It's also clarified early on that Sakuya and Itsuki are lovers and have been so since high school.
As you'll see, these are the only 5 characters that actually have character sprites throughout the entire game, which is where I'm actually recontextualizing that point earlier about Miss Ohara's beauty. You see, these are the only 5 character sprites in the game. The only 5. No one else. No one. I mean, occasionally we'll get a glimpse of some character or another through a CG, a still, a pre-made image that exemplifies a scene, but until we get something like that, we have to rely upon what Asuka describes to us as the player.
This is fine when it comes to the characters who only have one or two lines, maybe only showing up for a scene, but certain important characters we never see in full detail. During a segment where the girls are training at a hospital, we never see the nurse who Asuka shadows, or the patient she befriends until they show up in a really lazy CG. Hell, Machi and Michi, two members of your 6-person lab team, don't ever make a visual appearance in the whole story, and out of any of the characters, it's these two I need visualization for. Because without it, well...
私も皮肉っぽいかも私たちもちゃんでいいよ
It's honestly more than a little unnerving.
Asuka herself, well, I sort of have a love-hate relationship with her. She's cute, she's ditzy, and she has her moments of being funny or noble. But at the same time, she's effectively the player avatar, meaning the dissonance between the player's personality and the character's personality need to be accounted for in the way we're allowed to interact with the world. Which, really, it isn't. There are some choices we get to make on behalf of Asuka, some of which determines the different paths in the game, but the quality of these actual choices are questionable at best. We sometimes get completely logical choices, like whether or not it's worth it to go back to school in order to practice late at night, or make sure we get a good night's rest instead. On the other hand, you sometimes don't even get choices, like whether or not Asuka pisses her pants in the hospital in order to alleviate the anxiety of the patient she befriended.
Yeah, I would have liked a choice in that decision. Brave as it was mind-numbingly stupid, and the problem could have been solved in a far less convoluted manner.
To get back on point, much of the game's story takes place over the duration of Asuka's first year at Taito, experiencing every aspect of a nurse's day and learning everything she needs to know in order to become one. When the game goes into detail, it seems like it knows what it's talking about, and the Japanese version apparently came with a medical glossary as well, though considering I'm neither a medical professional or Japanese, I can't attest to either of those two facts. Regardless, life for Asuka seems pretty easy, only running into a few hiccups here and there, like finding Miss Ohara's resignation letter and having to keep it secret, or getting wrapped up as a cosplayer for Itsuki's new visual novel, or getting caught up in a lover spat between Itsuki and Sakuya. There's even a really touching arc involving the patient she befriended passing away between hospital visits, teaching the valuable lesson about the necessity of nurses keeping a professional distance from the people they treat. The main plot, which at this point revolves around the Itsuki-Sakuya fight, seemingly comes to a head during the school festival, as Asuka meets Sakuya on the rooftop and receives a kiss for her troubles.
Already getting macked on by a committed woman. I'll give Asuka some props. She works quick.
After Sakuya leaves, Asuka has some time to panic over the kiss, but before she can make sense of it, she's stabbed and killed by a mysterious figure in nursing garbs.
Well, I didn't see that coming.
But then apparently she's not? She wakes up in her bed and the whole stabbing incident seems to have been a dream. The results in an anemia attack now later explains. Which, I mean, Asuka kinda has been having weird dreams all throughout the story, so it's not outside the narrative for her to have a symbolic or prophetic dream about one of her classmates stabbing her in the chest. I imagine it's probably has something to do with a love triangle that's forming around Asuka, where one person is going to betray her and her lover or something like that. Deciding it was just a dream, Asuka moves on to question Itsuki about the strange nebulous relationship the prankster shares with Sakuya, resulting in Itsuki giving Asuka a flash drive that apparently has some kind of truth on it that will change Asuka's world. When Asuka gets home, however, the only thing on it is a text file that reads, "Wait half a year," which is a rather vague message that's well within Itsuki's character to have written. However, as time passes, the dynamic between the group changes, and half a year later, Asuka finds herself all on her own more and more often. Sakuya's mother ends up passing away, so she drops out of school, and Itsuki is never the most reliable of people when it comes to explaining herself, so questions about the flash drive go unanswered. Even Now is busier, going off and doing mysterious errands, leaving our protagonist alone at the dorm. The neutral route ends with her in her second year with Now and Itsuki, finding her life still somewhat fulfilling, but also pining to know why she wanted to become a nurse in the first place. Ultimately, the route doesn't answer any of the questions and is overall unfulfilling to the player.
But that's not why we're playing this now, is it? We're here to see cute girls getting their funk on together. So let's take a look at some of those alternate routes. In particular, I'm thinking it's time for some cougar hunting. How's it going, Miss Ohara? Wink!
There's only one key choice you need to make in order to get set on this track. After hearing some ghost stories about an abandoned archive room, Asuka decides one day to check it out while passing by. We, as players, are allowed to choose whether to investigate the room or to move on. Picking the latter option sends Asuka to the training room to get some practice in, only to find Miss O'Hara having once again lost her resignation letter. This is the same letter, mind you, that once we learned about it, she swore us to secrecy and forced Asuka into revealing a secret of her own in order to have her own leverage on the Pinkette. What leverage would that be? Well, apparently, Asuka doesn't have pubic hair. And to make doubly sure, Miss O'Hara forces Asuka to show her.
Kinky?
Potential sexual harassment charges aside, the two begin to bond over the secrecy, and Miss O'Hara slowly begins to open up about her life and her struggles. This is taken to its next level during an alternate scene during the school festival. Instead of heading up to the rooftop, being kissed by Sakuya, and then being dream-stabbed, Asuka instead walks by the archive room from earlier and hears crying from beyond the door, which was a key element to the ghost story that Now had told her and the others about. Deciding to be brave, she steps into the room and discovers that the abandoned archive room was an ideal secluded space for Miss O'Hara to cry in private over her stresses in her life. You're given the choice of whether to leave or stay with Miss O'Hara, but really it's a non-choice, as either way, Asuka decides to stay and comfort the older woman. By the end of it, the two agree to be on less formal terms in private, and Miss O'Hara even gives Asuka a kiss.
Like I said, Asuka works fast. I approve.
Confused about their relationship, Asuka confronts Miss O'Hara, leading them to have a heart-to-heart later at Miss O'Hara's house. The two admit their mutual attraction to each other and decide to become girlfriends, despite the whole teacher-student taboo. Things from there seem to be going pretty well. And then this happens.
Sensei, Asuka. Sensei, Asuka. Asuka.
Well, that wasn't creepy or anything.
Well, that little disturbing vignette is over, and the two have a rather swimming relationship, what with the occasional flirting behind the scenes, winks when no one is looking, and...
Sensei, Asuka. Sensei, Asuka.
Okay?
Moving on, the two finally discuss why Miss O'Hara carries around that resignation letter. It was written on her behalf by her ex-girlfriend, a fellow nurse who had gotten fed up with O'Hara leaning on her and wanted the woman to succeed on her own merits, without needing someone to prop her up. After they went their separate ways, O'Hara held onto the letter as a keepsake. I decided to have Asuka ask the sensible question if O'Hara even really needs the envelope anymore, which seems to embarrass her a little bit.
Listen, lady, I know it's hard, but sometimes you just have to let go of things that you're never going to get back.
Learning that the letter came from O'Hara's ex-lover puts Asuka on edge about the relationship, and eventually curiosity gets the better of her. While Miss O'Hara is in another room, she opens the letter and begins to read it, finding out it's actually a farewell that gives Miss O'Hara the opportunity to chase down her ex again. Panicking as her girlfriend comes back into the room, Asuka steals the envelope and begins debating what to do now that she knows what's written on it. I should know that this entire time, the player has zero input onto whether or not Asuka decides to steal the letter, which is kind of irritating. Spurred on by the knowledge that the ex never really gave up on O'Hara and that she is woefully outclassed by a veteran nurse, Asuka decides to step up her game and tries to seduce a teacher in many ways in order to engage in the super sexy times, an act that she reasons will give Miss O'Hara a motive to stay with her over going back to her ex. Asuka, though, has about as much seduction finesse as a bull in a stained glass china shop. This leads to...
Sensei.
Gah! Stop doing that!
What?
Thank you!
After that heart attack and a half, O'Hara finally confronts Asuka about her weird behavior. Panicked by the confrontation, Asuka runs, causing significant strain on their relationship. The whole thing comes to a head on Christmas when the two meet up for their first date in weeks, where the two manage to work back to their normal romantic dynamic. However, at the end of the date, Asuka chickens out of giving O'Hara back the resignation letter as she had planned, only to discover later that night O'Hara had actually swiped it from her surreptitiously. Asuka later learns that O'Hara reunited with her ex in the seasons past, with Asuka and O'Hara having broken up. Well, that's a damn shame. Things don't always work out as you imagine that... Wait. Why is she waking up at Ohara's place? Wait, I thought that she said that Ohara had made up with her ex. Wait. Ohara is having sex with her student behind her girlfriend's back. And she doesn't even love Asuka in return.
あれでも、なんでやだ。なんで私、こんな泣きそうになってるんだろう。
Okay, so that was a dark ending out of left field. Let's try a different route. I know, let's go with Nao. She's sweet, mild-tempered, and definitely dedicated 100% to Asuka. We aren't going to become anyone's side chick in this route, that's for sure. The big dividing point between Ohara's romantic route and the other three relies on whether or not Asuka investigates the haunted archive room the first time she comes across it. In it, she finds nothing but a few stray tears from when Ohara was crying to herself, and nothing else. After that, it's important that during the beach segment of the game that you say that Nao is the most attractive person among your group. After making that choice, you get an extra scene watching as Asuka lathers Nao up with some sunblock and engaging in some pleasant sisterly flirting.
What? That's a thing?
Before the game goes back to its regular progression. Aside from some small dialogue changes, the first major change along the route comes with Asuka's yearly headaches, which crop up around the rainy seasons. Nao is known as Asuka's miracle drug because she has an uncanny knack for getting the headaches to subside, using some gentle forehead bunting and some magic words in order to make the pain dissipate. This came up once or twice before in the story, and it wasn't really worth mentioning early on since it didn't play into things, though the light flirting that occurred during the second attempt seems to have been more relevant given that we're going down Nao's romantic route. This time, however, during the third headache that Asuka begins to suffer, Nao suggests taking standard medicine instead as a way of weaning away Asuka's dependent nature. And since Nao is obviously the responsible sister here, I agree and down the medicine. Afterwards, Nao breaks down into tears, and Asuka assumes it's probably emotional heartbreak that comes with the distancing they're putting between themselves by not doing their little ritual. On top of that, Nao shows Asuka the white flash drive that Itsuki had given her, which Asuka had lost, claiming to have found it while cleaning the room. This ends up jogging Asuka's memory, and considering that it's been 6 months since she read Itsuki's message, you know, the one that said wait half a year, she decided to confront Itsuki again on the matter. However, it is here that Itsuki reveals that she didn't write the message that Asuka saw, and that the contents of the USB drive were actually corrupted before Asuka could see them, a fact that leads the Greenette to suspect foul play and begins to finger Nao as the culprit. To emphasize her suspicions, she remarks about her and Sakuya's first run-in with Nao, which happened during a visitation to Taito before any of them had applied. You see, Asuka was sick at the time and couldn't attend, but Nao still went in her place and ran into both Itsuki and Sakuya, asking that they both act like they'd never met Asuka before once the four of them began attending classes together. Itsuki also then confirms the fact that she, Asuka, and Sakuya had met before even attending the academy. Asuka is very quickly confused.
So you're probably already asking, if the data was deleted, what was actually on that flash drive? Well, this is where things get a teensy bit complicated.
Itsuki addresses the memory loss that Asuka suffers as a result of falling out of a tree as a kid, an accident that is most likely to blame for her being unable to remember why she wants to become a nurse. But then she quickly flips the table by revealing that the tree accident was a fabrication on Nao's part, one that their parents ultimately decided to run with. Itsuki then begins to prove her claim by showing Asuka a video of herself, Sakuya, and Itsuki as childhood friends while being held at some kind of medical treatment facility. She even drops the bomb that Asuka and Sakuya were head over heels for each other.
Well, you know, as head over heels as 8-year-olds can be.
The revelation helps explain some of the unusual interactions between Asuka and Sakuya that occurred during the length of the novel, like heated debates and awkward exchanges where a single moment of misspoken dialogue would shut down the entire conversation. After confirming that it was most likely Nao who overwrote the memory stick, Itsuki takes off, leaving Asuka in a state of paranoia and disbelief, so much so that she passes out on a park bench with no concern for her personal well-being or safety. Luckily, Nao shows up to wake her up, and after some still rather warm dialogue, the two head home together. However, things aren't actually peachy keen, as Nao begins disappearing at unusual times to run mysterious errands, and Asuka even picks up Nao's phone when a stranger calls, getting a rather pissed off message from some woman she's never met. Now eventually returns from one of these errands with a strange bottle of medicine that she needs to take at regular intervals, calling it a nutritional supplement, though she warns Asuka away from taking it as it probably wouldn't agree with her constitution. Further drama unfolds after Sakia arrives to get some notes, only to leave and have a brief altercation of some kind with Nao, an altercation we never get to see occur. Both pass it off as an accident, but the tension between them suggests otherwise. Itsuki and Asuka meet up again so Itsuki can reveal more about the medical center, explaining that it had the front of being a pediatric center that specialized in experimental treatments, but in reality what they were doing was using orphans in order to study and develop special powers.
Could you repeat that?
You heard me right. Superpowers. I'm being 100% serious. I mean, there was an incident earlier in the game where Sakia and Itsuki tended to a wounded child, almost magically, but there were plenty of logical ways for the incident to have been explained practically, and most ideas revolving around superpowers were waved off as byproducts of Asuka's overactive imagination. But no, they're real. Superpowers are real. They're just a thing. Sakuya and Itsuki are noted to have healing hands, a gift that allows them to cure serious wounds with little issue. Asuka, being a perpetual underachiever both before and after her memory loss, was almost a wash-up with no real powers to speak of, but the latent potential she had made her valuable as a guinea pig like the rest. She's even shown a video of herself being experimented on in some kind of electric chair. Itsuki then explains that the lab ultimately burned down, which winds up triggering a brief memory for Asuka. In the aftermath, Asuka went missing and was presumed dead. Itsuki finishes off this round of mental whammies by revealing that Asuka and Nao are both adopted children, a fact that Asuka never knew until this point. After that, the two agree that Nao's history is now shrouded in mystery, and they part ways for the day.
Mysterious children being kidnapped by an evil laboratory in order to better improve their psychic powers. Where did I heard that one before? When did this come out again? Well, that's one hell of a coincidence. Or is it? Yeah, actually, probably is.
Asuka begins to question Nao's past more and more. Showing some actual initiative, she begins to grill Nao about some of the points in her life where she has lapses in her memory, doing an admittedly impressive job of keeping to the edges of those gaps so she has some memories to corroborate whatever Nao says. However, Nao is equally as skilled at getting Asuka off topic, and the two go on a tangent before Nao suggests that the two go on a date together, ominously saying that it will be their first and last date together before the night closes. The two have a pleasant little date and end up sleeping in the same bed that night.
Just sleeping. Get your mind out of the gutter, perverts.
Asuka wakes up in the middle of the night and realizes Nao has left the room. Chasing after her, she finds herself on top of the roof when Nao pops out of nowhere, beats Asuka into submission, ties her arms behind her backs, and begins talking like she was hired by fucking Ernest Blofeld, saying that she's about to erase Asuka's memories of learning about her past.
What?
Yeah, so apparently Nao is actually a child at the research lab, but one that was kept in isolation so none of the other children ever knew about her. She was supposedly the reason for all the experiments, the most powerful of the children with abilities, with the capability to heal mortal wounds and even erase memories. This easily explains the memory loss that Asuka has suffered across her life, and the fact that she survived what should have been a fatal stabbing on the school roof during the festival.
Oh, and it gets better. Remember those headaches that Asuka gets during the rainy season? Yeah, well, it turns out those were her memories trying to come back, which means that little ritual that Nao did with her was actually what was keeping her from remembering. Dick move, Nao. Real dick move.
Maybe I shouldn't necessarily say that. Nao actually explains that the reason she's done this was to protect Asuka from painful memories that kept her awake at night, such as the fire and the experiments that were performed on her. On top of that, her powers are starting to wane, which is why she traded off her special ritual for memory-suppressing medicine instead. Still kind of a dick move, but I can see where she was coming from with her good intentions. It doesn't necessarily explain why she's being such a bitch with the way she's tying down Asuka, though. I mean, seriously, if you really want to keep your sister close, even if you can erase her memories, beating her senseless isn't exactly the best way to go about it. Anyway, after realizing that she's failing to erase Asuka's memories, Nao begins to vomit up pills that are supposed to reinvigorate her powers, revealing that they're good for boosting her abilities but also cause a physical strain on the body, hence the vomiting. In desperation, she tries to take more of the pills, but Asuka takes some initiative and kisses Nao to steal the pills from her mouth, which are mixed in with Nao's vomit. The pills in turn cause Asuka's latent powers to activate. The ability to recover her lost memories.
That is the most useless superpower I have ever heard of in my life.
Well, regardless, that one really oddly specific power comes in use, as she remembers everything vital to the plot, and even the fact that Nao was doing most of these things in order to take care of Asuka, and even remembers the day the two of them first met. After having a short discussion about the morality behind Nao's actions, she begs Asuka not to forgive her. We're once more given the chance to choose whether or not Asuka responds with one of these two choices. Knowing everything we know about her motives, and me being the forgiving guy that I am, choose to ignore that suggestion and absolve her of any wrongdoing.
I mean, yeah, she was a little aggressive, but, I mean, people get panicked when something they love might get hurt. I won't say what she did was justified, but it's certainly understandable.
Time fast forwards after that to the capping ceremony during their second year, which is apparently a pretty big deal for nursing students, although Nao doesn't seem very well throughout the whole procession. She makes it through the whole ceremony, but she seems like she's on the verge of fainting by the end. Asuka brushes people aside, asking for class photographs, and guides Nao back to the dorm room, promising to do it with her when they get back.
Okay. What's that all about?
We jump forward to her third year, where Nao is seemingly absent. On her way home, Asuka explains that Nao's health slowly degraded the longer she was around Asuka, with her whole body getting sore whenever the two were happy together. She arrives home, opening the door to Nao's room to find, oh dear God! Yeah. So, according to Asuka, there's only one way to alleviate Nao's suffering, which is to physically hurt her. Which is why she apparently spends all day tied up in bondage knots inside her room. Asuka also specifies that she has to be the one to do it, no one else will do. The scene ends with Asuka choking Nao to near unconsciousness, both of them with smiles on their faces, and Asuka wondering if Nao will be able to last 5 hours this time instead of just 3. Alright. So Nao's ending didn't pan out either. Let's move on. I know. Let's do Itsuki. She's playful, she's fun. Asuka and her go back and forth teasing each other. They'll make a great couple. This one is similar to Nao's route, though this time we're going to have to choose Itsuki as the winner of the beach contest. We get yet another specific scene with the person we chose, and hey, look, more people that don't get unique character sprites. The story progresses normally from there. Itsuki and Sakia break up, the festival happens, Sakia kisses Asuka, and Asuka gets stabbed before waking up thinking it was a dream. Same story for the USB plotline, only after she's finally confronted with the first section of truth, Asuka begins to question her feelings for Itsuki, finding it curious that she can't exactly peg down how she feels about the prankster. From this point forward, the story shows divergence from Nao's route, where it becomes the joint goal between Asuka and Itsuki to recover Asuka's trapped memories in order to reignite Asuka and Sakia's love for one another from back when they were in the lab together. As this progresses, Asuka becomes more and more confident about her feelings for Itsuki, but also gradually becomes more irritated with the way Itsuki talks about the person Asuka used to be. This eventually leads to Asuka snapping at Itsuki during one of their meetings and accusing Itsuki of loving past Asuka more than Sakia did, what with the way Itsuki kept playing up how she strived to match Asuka's example. In a fit of rage, Itsuki pins Asuka to the wall and kisses her in order to shut her up.
I mean, as you do.
This results in the both of them hurting each other's feelings and cooling off their efforts to recover Asuka's memories. Desperate to keep Itsuki off her mind, Asuka throws herself into her studies and makes a large improvement in the quality of her work at school, earning praise from her teacher and her sister, but never quite tuning out the awkward stares Itsuki throws her during class. One night while studying, Asuka volunteers to get some groceries, running into a driver in need of directions. Unlike most people, Asuka doesn't have a single shred of common sense, so when the driver begins getting more specific about where she's heading and who she's looking for, not a single red flag pops into the pinkhead's mind. So when she looks over the woman's shoulder, she's hit by a goddamn stun gun and kidnapped because of fucking course she is. Christ. I mentioned earlier that Asuka dressed up in cosplay for Itsuki, but I didn't really explain why. You see, Itsuki and her development group named Cutesy Laboratory were making a visual novel about a magical girl named Wizard Nurse Prima, and Asuka was drafted as the de facto official cosplayer. Well, when Asuka wakes up, it's at Cutesy Laboratories with the same woman who knocked her out having tied her up.
And of course, things get fucking complicated.
See, this woman explains that Cutesy Laboratories is really a front for the group that was doing evil research when Asuka, Sakia, Itsuki, and Nao were children, and Itsuki had, in fact, been working for them this entire time with a clear rule that Sakia would not be touched. This girl holding Asuka captive, she has a name and even a face, but I can't be bothered to give two shits about who she is at this point, has a personal vendetta against Itsuki because she feels that the prankster is just wasting the lab's time with developing the visual novel and being more of an irritation than an asset. The reason she kidnapped Asuka goes back to the fact that she was reported dead after the fire at the evil laboratory, and when Itsuki found out she was alive, the girl immediately added Asuka to the protection list. However, the kidnapper wants answers and doesn't give a shit what Itsuki wants. During all this exposition, Itsuki manages to sneak in, and while the kidnapper is getting something to drink, tells us to find a way to distract her, even if it means letting Asuka get molested. Well, fuck that noise! I didn't sign on to be sexually assaulted today! Itsuki's cover is blown when Asuka resists, and she and the kidnapper fight, ending with Itsuki beaten, but she thinks quickly and uses the passing cop sirens to trick the kidnapper into thinking she called the police. With the kidnapper away, she and Asuka manage to escape. The two part ways with Itsuki swearing to destroy the lab once and for all, no matter what it takes. This leads to a 3-week period where Itsuki is missing and Asuka becomes more agitated. Eventually, one of the old lab members sends her the alpha build of the visual novel, which was never completed. After playing through it, she realizes for sure that Itsuki really was in love with the past Asuka. So she suits up in a prima outfit and goes out to advertise the unfinished game in a last-ditch attempt to catch Itsuki's eye. The plan doesn't succeed, but she actually runs into Itsuki while on their way home. It's not a happy reunion, though, because Itsuki has gotten herself mortally injured. Yeah, it turns out that kidnapper escaping came back to bite her in the ass. After the two of them finally get to admit their love for one another, Itsuki passes away in Asuka's arms, with her last words lamenting how she never got a chance to be one with Asuka.
Jesus Christ! Can't these girls just have a fucking happy ending for once?
But perhaps I spoke too soon, because fast forward on an afternoon in Sakia and Itsuki's old room, and Asuka is happily eating lunch with what appears to be either Itsuki's ghost or a delusion. Apparently Asuka moved into the dorm and has been having meals with the Figment every day since her death. But she keeps saying something odd, that the meals are Itsuki's meals, like the ghost prepared them or something.
But that doesn't make any sense. A ghost can't prepare meals, and Asuka says she's running out, like Itsuki prepared the meals in advance. She even had to get a bigger fridge in order to keep all the ingredients that Itsuki got for her. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Where's Itsuki's corpse? Next.
Okay, fourth time's the charm. Sakia and Asuka have been played up as lovers across every route of the game, even though they never wind up together in those. This is possibly the most canon route of the game. It has to have a happy ending. Right?
Right?
Okay, so like the others, story is normal. Cute beach scene where you choose her in the mini contest, break up, kiss, get stabbed, and you'll wind up on the right route. Obviously, this one focuses much more on Sakia, so I have to touch on a few things that I didn't earlier, like the fact that Sakia's mother was pretty old when she adopted the girl. Her mother is responsible for Sakia being forced to leave class several times throughout the story, and eventually passes away during the school year. This is important thanks to a few future plot points. The USB plot again goes off relatively similar to Nao and Itsuki's roots, and the first major development comes from a dream that Asuka has that leads to her dropping the formal way she addresses Sakia, most likely a remnant of their shared past registering from their subconscious. We're also treated to a slightly different point in the video that Itsuki shows to Asuka, one that makes reference to a girl named Kyoko. Itsuki explains that Kyoko was Sakia's twin sister, who perished in the fire at the laboratory, and that the two were of opposite personalities despite being physically identical. It's here that more divergence happens as Asuka is confronted by Sakia when going to talk some more with Itsuki at the karaoke booth. She directs Asuka away from the karaoke booth, implying that she stopped Itsuki from showing up at the pre-arranged meeting. Sure enough, when Asuka decides to wait for Itsuki, the girl doesn't show. Worried for Itsuki's safety, after not hearing from her all day, she goes to ask Sakuya and finds the woman in a completely different disposition, as she helps Asuka almost immediately contact the missing Itsuki. Along with this, she reveals that she's debating reading her deceased mother's secret diary, which had a specific message trying to ensure that Sakuya would never read it. Well, in the middle of this conversation, Asuka lets it slip that Itsuki was telling her about her past and decides to come clean to both Sakuya and Nao about her collusion with the prankster. The next day, Asuka arranges a strategy meeting with Itsuki and Nao, where Itsuki finally elaborates on some things. First, she reveals that Kyoko was in love with Sakuya and was basically the world's worst yandere sister. And second, that Sakuya needed an organ transplant after the fire, and who better to get one from than her recently deceased identical twin? Only, the organs came with something a little extra.
Kyoko's consciousness. Yeah. Sakuya is actually partially possessed by the ghost of her dead sister's spleen. I can't make this shit up!
It turns out it was Kyoko that actually captured Itsuki on the day she and Asuka were supposed to meet, and it was also the personality that threatened Asuka later that day. The next day, or some arbitrary short amount of time later, Sakuya is hospitalized thanks to her fatigue of trying to juggle her mother's death, her family duties, and school all at once. Sakuya explains that she plans on repeating the second year, which means Asuka will now be her senior. It's also around this time that Asuka realizes that the picture book she has that inspired her to become a nurse was most likely Sakuya's before the lab burned down. When asking about it though, Sakuya, or more likely Kyoko, snaps at Asuka and makes her promise to focus on her studies instead of visiting her in the hospital. Asuka doesn't stand for that though, and visits every day, studying quietly together while Sakuya listens to music and reads her mother's diary. After a period of time, Sakuya discovers missing pages in the diary and uses a pretty tricky tactic to get Asuka to go looking for them in her old dorm room. After finding them and reading them, Asuka manages to get her memories back, memories that sent her into a panic. On instinct, she rushes to the hospital with Sakuya, finding that the girl's room has caught on fucking fire! Yeah, it turns out that Kyoko is pulling the ultimate trump card of any good yandere. Going down with the ship, all hands aboard! Asuka deduces that Sakuya and Kyoko were communicating by way of the MP3 player that Sakuya had, recording messages and listening to each other back and forth. Sakuya had been planning to drop out of school once she got out of the hospital in order to get Asuka safely away from Kyoko. Yeah, remember that whole stabbing thing? That was Kyoko. Asuka's life is literally on the line every day that Kyoko's around, and Sakuya wasn't exactly a fan of that. After some rather emotional words, Asuka rushes forward and hugs Sakuya, bringing her personality back to the forefront and calming her down just in time for the flames to be put out. Before the two can kiss and finally reunite, Sakuya passes out. So, that organ transplant she got from her sister? Well, get this. It was Sakuya that died and Kyoko that survived and needed the transplant. That's right. This whole time, Asuka has been falling in love with the fucking spleen ghost. Oh, sorry, I was wrong. Apparently the human soul isn't stored in the spleen, it's stored in the fucking kidneys. Regardless, once the transfer is done, Sakuya will well and truly die, so Asuka makes a spur of the moment decision to marry the girl. Now you're given a choice of which of the two you can marry, and yeah, Sakuya did kinda ask that you take care of Kyoko, and Kyoko did say she'd rather die than lose her sister. But fuck that bitch, she stabbed Asuka, kidnapped Itsuki, and damn near burned down a hospital. Like hell am I going to marry her? So the route ends with Sakuya and Asuka getting married on the school rooftop. And don't the two just look adorable in those white dresses? We finally have a happy ending. Why isn't Sakuya moving? Why are her eyes closed? What does Asuka say her lips are cold? Why? Just... why?
What the fuck is wrong with this game?
I thought that should be a lighthearted romance story where all the characters found their true loves, but no! It's nothing like that! Student-teacher adultery, BDSM incest, cannibalistic grief, magical kidney ghosts, and necrophiliac weddings! Where does this ride end? Who thought any of this was a good idea? Why is this in my Yuri romance visual novel?
Oh god! I've wasted weeks of my life on this review. I just wanted to play a game about cute girls kissing each other. Is that too much to ask?
The thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes like a doll's eyes.